The vanishing visitors. It was the night of April 9th when the first disappearance occurred. The town of Thornhill, a small, sleepy place tucked away in the dense woods of Pennsylvania, had seen its share of whispers and legends. For years, the locals spoke of strange happenings in the old, abandoned mill by the creek. Some claimed it was cursed, others said it was the home of restless spirits, but no one had ever dared to investigate, until that night. Sophia Harris had recently moved to Thornhill, seeking a quiet life after the chaos of city living. She had heard the stories, of course, everyone in town had. But she thought of them as nothing more than local folklore, a harmless way for the townspeople to entertain themselves on long, lonely nights. That was until she met Jenny, a local librarian and friend, who insisted on telling her about the cursed mill. "The thing is, Sophia," Jenny had said with a shiver, "there are people who disappeared after they saw something in that mill. No one knows where they went or what happened to them, but they're gone. Just gone. No trace." Sophia laughed it off at first, dismissing the tales as nothing more than overactive imaginations. But as she stood outside the mill that fateful night, an unexplainable chill crept up her spine. She hadn't meant to come here. Jenny had invited her over for dinner, but a storm had begun to roll in and Sophia, feeling restless, decided to walk it off. She wandered towards the mill, the wind howling in her ears, the trees swaying eerily under the weight of the dark clouds overhead. There was something about the place, something that pulled her closer. It wasn't just the mill itself, but the feeling of being watched, the way the atmosphere seemed to thicken with every step she took. The mill loomed before her like an old monster, silent and foreboding. The windows were boarded up and the door was rotting on its hinges, but there was a strange light coming from inside, flickering in the cracks. Her curiosity, combined with a healthy dose of skepticism, pushed her forward. When she reached the door, her breath caught in her throat. There, standing in the dark entryway, was a figure. A man tall with a broad build, but his features were obscured by shadows. He wore an old-fashioned suit, something from another time, perhaps the 1800s, and his eyes gleamed, though they were hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Sophia's heart raced. She stepped forward, her voice faltering. "Excuse me? Can I help you?" The figure didn't respond. He simply stared at her, unmoving, his presence heavy in the air. It was as if time had stopped altogether. Without thinking, Sophia took a step back, but her foot caught the edge of a loose stone, sending her tumbling forward into the doorway. The figure didn't flinch, didn't move. She scrambled to her feet, her pulse pounding, but the man was gone. In his place was only the faint flicker of a candle on the dusty floor. The door swung open behind her, the wind howling through the gaps. She couldn't bring herself to turn around, but she felt the unmistakable presence of someone, or something, watching her. Before she could leave, a voice called out from the darkness, "Sophia?" The whisper was low, almost a growl, but it was unmistakable. She recognized the voice. It was Jenny. Panic surged through her chest. She spun around, heart pounding, expecting to see her friend standing in the doorway. But there was no one. The mill was empty, save for the dim light flickering on the floor. The voice came again, but this time it was closer. "Sophia, help me." With a scream, Sophia turned and ran, ignoring the sharp sting of branches as they whipped against her skin. She didn't stop until she reached her car, her hands shaking as she fumbled for the keys. The storm had started in earnest now, and the rain poured down in sheets. She sped through the winding roads, her mind a jumble of confusion and fear. The next morning, when she went to the library to meet Jenny, she was still shaken. Jenny was late, but that wasn't unusual. What caught Sophia off guard was that the librarian had not responded to any of her calls. Anxiously, Sophia paced the library, but when she finally spotted Jenny, she froze. Jenny was standing by the shelves, her back to Sophia, staring intently at a book in her hands. But it was her eyes, or the lack of them, that made Sophia gasp. Jenny's eyes were gone, replaced by two black, empty sockets. Her face was pale, drawn, like she hadn't slept in days. "Sophia," Jenny's voice echoed from across the room, a distorted, hollow version of itself. "I told you to stay away." Sophia could barely breathe. "What happened to you? What's going on?" Jenny didn't turn around. "I couldn't stop it, Sophia. No one can. They'll come for you too. You've seen them now." The room began to spin. Her breath came in short gasps as the oppressive weight of fear pressed down on her. Who will come for me?" Jenny's lips curled into a faint smile, but it was not a comforting one. "The ones who vanish, like I did, like you will. The mill claims those who are foolish enough to look inside." Sophia backed away, heart hammering in her chest, but Jenny didn't move. Her body remained still, a hollow shell of the friend she had known. "I didn't believe it, until now," Jenny whispered. "I've seen them too. The ghosts who vanished. They never leave. They live on trapped in the mill. And they want more." Sophia turned and ran from the library, the unsettling weight of Jenny's words pressing heavily on her chest. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. What was happening to the people of Thornhill? Was it the curse of the mill, or was it something far more sinister? As she sprinted back toward her car, she felt eyes on her, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She wasn't alone. Something was watching her. Something was coming for her. Sophia had seen the ghost. She had heard the whispers. And now she would pay the price. But where had Jenny gone? And where would Sophia go when it was her turn to vanish? The answers, Sophia realized, could only be found inside the mill. The ghost behind the mill. Sophia's mind raced as she drove through the pouring rain, her knuckles white as they gripped the steering wheel. The words Jenny had spoken echoed in her ears, growing louder with every passing moment. The mill claims those who are foolish enough to look inside. She had to find out what Jenny meant. She had to know what was happening to the people of Thornhill. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of what she had seen. The air around her seemed to crackle, heavy with the unseen forces that haunted the town. Her heart thudded in her chest as her headlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating the twisted branches that reached toward her like the fingers of a long-forgotten ghost.
Sophia's heart hammered in her chest, and her legs trembled beneath her, but she knew she couldn't show fear. Not now. Not when she was so close. There was something she had to do, something she had to understand about the mill, about what was truly happening here. She had to break the cycle. "You're trapped," Sophia whispered, her voice barely a breath. "But I won't be. I can't be." Jenny's face twisted into an unreadable expression. "You don't know what you're saying," she said, the words strained. "No one ever escapes. We all see the truth, and then we fade away." Sophia stumbled back, her head spinning. She had seen too much, understood too little. But deep inside she felt a flicker of hope, a faint whisper that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. She couldn't let herself vanish like Jenny. She couldn't let herself be swallowed whole by the shadows, bound to this cursed mill forever. The woman, the spirit, the victims of the mill, they had all been victims of something greater than themselves, trapped in a nightmare that had no end. The mill itself was feeding on them, consuming them. And it would keep doing so, endlessly, unless someone broke the chain. She took a deep breath, rallying her strength, and turned to face the looming door of the mill. The darkness that had swallowed it moments ago seemed to retreat at her defiance, the air growing slightly lighter, as if the building itself was holding its breath. "Listen to me," she said, her voice now firm, no longer shaking with fear. "I know you've all suffered, but I'm not going to let you take me. I'm not going to become another ghost of the mill." The shadows froze. For a split second, everything was still. No sound. No movement. Just an eerie silence that swallowed the mill whole. Then, with a sudden, gut-wrenching scream, the shadows surged toward her. She stumbled backward, her heart racing, as the room seemed to close in around her. The darkness was everywhere, consuming everything in its path, and the air turned ice-cold. But Sophia didn't let go of her resolve. She gripped the old iron doorknob with both hands and turned, forcing herself to stand tall. She closed her eyes, gathering everything she had left, the strength, the courage, the fire within her. She wasn't going to give in. With a force she didn't know she possessed, she yanked the door open, her body shaking from the effort, and a flash of light burst through the mill. The shadows recoiled, screeching, as if they were being torn apart by the light. The air was thick with their rage, but they couldn't touch her now. The doorway had opened, no longer to imprison her, but to release her. And with one last, desperate look at the ghostly forms that once haunted this place, Sophia stepped out into the light. The shadows screamed, their final cry echoing through the night, but as she crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut with a deafening sound, and the mill was silenced. The spirits, the curse, the malevolent force that had controlled them, were all gone. Sophia was free. But when she turned back to look at the mill, the same unease crept back into her chest. The mill, silent now, stood just as it had before. The world around her felt different. The air was lighter, clearer, but something still lingered, as if the story wasn't entirely finished. She glanced back at the town of Thornhill. The people would never know the truth. They would never know how close they had come to losing everything. But Sophia would. As she walked away from the mill, her footsteps steady, her heart still pounding, she realized something that made her blood run cold. There would always be others. New visitors, new souls, drawn to the mill by its whispers. It would never stop. And the truth, as horrible as it was, would never truly leave her. She glanced down at her wrist, where the faintest mark remained, a dark, bruised imprint, as though the shadows had left their mark on her. A reminder of what she had faced. A reminder that, no matter how far she ran, the ghosts of the mill would always be watching, always waiting. Sophia didn't look back again. But as she disappeared into the night, one thing remained clear: the mill was still out there, waiting for its next victim. And the whispers? They had already begun again. From the shadows, the woman from the portrait appeared again, her gaunt, ghostly figure standing like a sentinel in the darkness. Her eyes gleamed with a cruel light, and her lips twisted into a twisted, cold smile. "It was never a house you bought," she said, her voice cold and distant. "It was a prison. And now you're trapped inside it. All who come here pay a price, and for you, Jacob Holloway, the price is not gold, nor land, nor riches. It is everything you are. Your life. Your soul. Your future." Jacob wanted to protest, wanted to shout that he didn't deserve this, that it wasn't fair, but the words caught in his throat. The weight of the curse of Holloway Manor, pressed on him like a heavy stone, pushing him deeper into despair. The house, it had always been alive. It had always fed on the souls of those foolish enough to think they could escape its grasp. The figure, no longer just a man, but a thing of pure darkness, stepped closer, its bony fingers stretching toward Jacob's chest. He could feel the chill of its touch, colder than the depths of winter. He gasped, his vision swimming within oppressive darkness, and the words of the letter, "The price will never be paid until you give what is truly yours," rung in his mind like the tolling of a bell. But just as the figure's hand was about to reach him, a voice, his own voice, cried out from the deepest part of his soul. No. He would not give in. He would not let this cursed place claim him completely. And in that moment, something inside Jacob shifted. Something that had been buried deep within him for years. His ancestors, his family, had always believed in the old stories, in the curses, in the power of the land. And Jacob, in his blind ambition, had ignored it all. But now he understood. The house had taken so much from him already. His family had built it, paid the price long ago. He was the last of the Holloways, the last to stand here, and he knew now what he had to do. His hands trembled as he reached for the pendant around his neck, a family heirloom, passed down through generations. The metal was warm against his skin, a stark contrast to the chill that surrounded him. As his fingers brushed against it, he could feel a power surge within him, an ancient power, long buried by time and forgotten by his family. The whispers, the shadows, they all seemed to pause, as though they were waiting for him to make his choice. With a force of will he didn't know he possessed, Jacob stood up. The figure recoiled, its skeletal hands stopping just short of his chest. The woman's smile faltered as she looked at him, and for the first time, Jacob saw fear in her eyes. "You think you can escape?" the woman hissed, but there was a tremor in her voice. "You think you can change the price?" Jacob held the pendant tightly in his hand, and for the first time, he understood the power of his ancestors. The house, the curse, it had all been a cycle, passed down from one generation to the next. But that cycle could be broken. "I don't need to escape," Jacob said, his voice steady. "I need to end this." And with that, he thrust the pendant into the heart of the house, into the shadows, into the very core of the darkness that had taken so much from him. The moment the pendant touched the ground, a shockwave of energy rippled through the room. The house groaned and trembled, the walls shaking as if they were coming apart. For a brief moment, The darkness seemed to scream, a terrible, guttural sound that reverberated through the walls. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the house fell silent. Jacob collapsed to his knees, exhausted but alive. The house had stopped. The curse had broken. But as he sat there, breathing in the silence, something strange began to happen. The woman, the ghost, vanished, her figure dissipating into the air like smoke. And the skeletal figure, once towering and terrifying, faded away into the shadows. It was over. But was it really? Jacob stood up, his legs shaky but determined. The house, once so oppressive and alive with the curse of his ancestors, was now quiet. The oppressive weight that had filled the halls for generations was gone. But as Jacob stood in the center of the now empty manor, he couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered. The price, after all, had never truly been paid. What had he given up? What had the house taken from him that he might never get back? The wind picked up outside, rustling the trees and shaking the branches, as though the house itself was whispering a warning to him. The house had been silent, but that didn't mean the curse was truly broken. Jacob Holloway had freed himself from the cycle. But deep down, in the quiet spaces of his heart, he knew he would never be the same. He had paid a price, and the cost, whatever it was, would follow him for the rest of his life. The man who had bought a house for $1 had learned that some bargains are too steep to ever pay off.